Well, it's been a somewhat quiet week, except that the news today was that we're not going to keep getting older and older. Where there's a final ceiling on the extension of human life at 115.
I missed that. My goodness, that's like the most breaking news bulletin in the history of the world.
So I don't have as much time left as I thought.
We better speak quickly. This has now been determined that all these people who are walking around eating 90 calories a day are they don't.
Well, apparently there was an article in Nature about it, and in Nature it must be correct.
Okay.
They finally reckoned that there's a built time frame, and it was all done with a picture of the woman who died at the age of 122 a few years ago in France. They said it's not an exact, but it's more or less around 115, and it's not infinitely extendable because our organs wear out.
I could see that, but
it's the sort of thing that I know people in the medical profession have been saying for some time. However, since we can clone things now and do all sorts of things to our DNA, one assumes it should be possible to
regrow organs,
reorganize the DNA that relates to organs, and build in all sorts of other things that make them more durable.
Let me ask you this: from an anthropological perspective, has it always been a preoccupation of mankind to extend life?
No, I think not. I think it's always. How to deal with death has always been a major concern in every society.
Mm-hmm.
It's taken for granted that it has to happen, and the problem is, how do you explain what happens when people die?
Mm-hmm.
So, there are groups of non-literate people in the Southwest Pacific who when somebody dies, they put them up in their rafters and leave them there for a year to let them decompose. And then when the body is completely decomposed, they bury the bones. And that's the most extreme
yes,
way I can think that I'm familiar with that has been developed. But after all, we have ideas about another world, and every society, I think, every cultural community has developed some idea of what happens after death, even if it's nothing.
Mm-hmm.
But even if it's nothing, the problem is you've got to somehow go through a process that takes care of the breaking of relationships. It's not just the biological termination, it's the social termination of an individual who's a member of a community.
I'm thinking of this in terms, obviously, there was another suicide bombing today on the Syrian-Turkish border. Some 19 or 20 people were killed, and in a village, and ISIS claimed responsibility. And obviously, it's the ability for humans to be convinced of something that is completely unknowable empirically, what happens after death. It's the ability for humans to maintain a certain view or belief of what that will be that enables them to commit crimes such as a suicide attack and sacrifice oneself. And it's the same thing with every religious conflict throughout the ages. Groups of people fighting each other over something that is completely unknowable, no matter what. It just can't ever be learned. And even the combatants would recognize that. It's so peculiar.
It's absolutely amazing what human beings will believe.
But believing it to the point of sacrificing their lives.
Yeah. And that's one of the things that's particularly interesting about the current phase of social change, that it seems to be so easy to find people who are willing to kill themselves in order to obtain some sort of objective.
That's particularly
Whereas,
disturbing, because one would have thought that with the increasing globalization that more people would become aware to the point of beginning to recognize that, hey, wait a minute, there are probably some limits here in this collective consciousness that we're all sharing now. But instead, what's happening is this increased stratification, as you suggest.
yeah. Well, I think that, what I've had on my mind thinking about these things is that it's something that I'm sure has come up in our discussions before, but maybe this will be a new angle on it, that the quality of human life is changing. So it's not only that now there's a much greater age range between the people interacting with each other, which changes the range of relationships that you can have with people. Add that to the fact that we're all interacting with a far larger number of people than we did before. Mm-hmm. But also that people are thinking differently about death. And there's a much greater range of difference in the way people think about death. I think that all of this has to do with the what is related to the enormous explosion in the rate of change everywhere, and the fact that wherever you go, the rate of change is different from neighboring places. Mm-hmm. And so, on the one hand, people are trying very hard to deal with what's new because of the rate of change. But at the same time, they're also concerned about the people who are changing at a different rate from them that they come into interaction with, because they think differently and they get annoyed with them. Mm-hmm. And I think that this, the fact that so many people are willing to sacrifice themselves in order to obtain some sort of objective has a lot to do with the way that in this crucial phase of globalization, as I've said before, people's values are at stake, and they'll do anything to hold on to the values that they treasured in the past or that they believe are essential to human life, and they see being threatened.
So in some ways then, religious beliefs are acting as a bit of a support and buttress for those who are nervous and afraid of uneven change. They can retreat into their religious understandings and not only derive comfort there.
The 20th century was the century of psychology, and the number of people seeing psychologists continues to increase. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Now, it's true that psychologists weren't marketing themselves before well into the 20th century, and they're probably marketing themselves better and better, so that may be one of the factors involved. But I think that mental not fitting in mentally, not understanding where you fit into society is an increasing problem.
You know, I'm telling you, I had a little bit of an epiphany over the past couple of weeks. I was thinking about, I guess in response to some of these terrorist attacks, and especially in France, seeing French soldiers on street corners in groups armed with machine guns, and they're so young. I mean, the kids they're like 20 years old, and I remember thinking to myself, my goodness, that's amazing. A young person, women and men, willing to give their lives in the service of their country. And then that began to rumble around in my mind a little bit. I began to think of people dying on behalf of their nations, on behalf of their countries, for political ideals. And then I began to think about religious wars. You can't help but not think about that with ISIS. And then I began to think about all of the hundreds of thousands, if not millions of people killed in religious wars over something that's far more abstract than a political nation versus nation war. And the whole, I don't want to say absurdity of it, I'll be struck by lightning through the window, but the whole absurdity of it just struck me for a second. I'm like, my goodness, these people will never know the answer until they do die as to what they're dying for. It's It's very peculiar. It's still, despite all the modernity and sophistication that we like to surround ourselves with in the 21st century, it's the same thing.
Yes.
It's very disturbing. We're not too far from the Southwest Pacific villagers who put Grandpa up in the rafters.
Well, because the interesting thing is to see this in terms of a trajectory and understand how it came to be the way it is now, and try to understand what the future scenarios might be that it may be leading to. Obviously, the number of different ways of understanding the world is probably diminishing because of the globalization of particular universalistic religions, and also because of the growth of secularism and atheism, which means that the problem of agreement is probably going to become a more difficult problem.
Do you think religion versus increased secularism has any bearing on the ability to come to agreements or compromise?
Well, I think that I don't know the best way to say this, but when there were so many different religious ways of understanding these things, then everybody was familiar with the fact that there are so many different ways of thinking about it. And now there's 3 or 4 that are dominant throughout the world. Either it's nothing, or there's a particular afterlife which is programmed, or it's rebirth. The problem is the degree to which you take any of these seriously. And that varies from community to community. And that's why one community gets annoyed with the other communities.
And that's also back to the uneven rate of change, the uneven rate of growth.
Yeah.
Very interesting. You come full circle on a very interesting topic.
That's, I'm afraid, as the era of the nation state comes to an end, and people are looking for larger identities, one wonders whether religion will become a major way for people to group together and identify themselves, as it has been in the past, before the era of the nation state.
Very interesting, Professor, as usual. Well, this has been a very enlightening and spiritual kind of discussion. So thank you very much. I look forward to next week.
Okay.
Bye.
Here's for now.